much, Ms. Wells, and welcome everybody. I will now call this meeting to order. It is Monday, March 22nd. Welcome to the Senate Committee on Judiciary of the 81st Legislative Session. Would the Secretary please call the roll?
Vice Chair Cannizzaro.
Here.
Senator Orenshaw.
Here.
Senator Harris.
Here.
Senator Settlemyre.
Here.
Senator Hansen.
Here.
Senator Pickard.
Please mark Senator Pickard as present when he arrives, and I will try to remember to make a note of it as well.
Chair Scheibel.
And I am here. And with that, we have a quorum and we are ready to begin. We also have Mr. Patrick Guinan with us from the Legislative Council Bureau. He is our policy analyst, and Nick Anthony, our committee counsel, is always available to answer questions for us, as he has been for several weeks now. He is busy drafting legislation and unable to sit in on the meeting in lifetime, but again, remains available to us to answer questions. Before we dive into our first and only bill hearing today, I do want to go over two quick housekeeping items. The first is that our committee is still missing some bill draft requests. And by missing, I mean we still have some bill draft requests to approve and introduce as bills. We have the luxury of meeting every single day, so hopefully we will be able to review any that still come in and address them in our normal meetings. However, it's also possible that we will have to have a floor meeting to introduce one of those bills. You all received directions from our Secretary of the Senate regarding the protocol for floor meetings, which has changed significantly due to COVID-19 protocols. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of that and had a minute to take a look at those before our next floor session, in case we are one of the lucky committees that gets to do a floor session of our committee meeting. The other thing that I wanted to let you know about is that we will now be meeting on Fridays. I know it has been very nice to not be here or there or wherever you might Zoom in from on Fridays, but this committee simply has a large enough workload that we have to start doing those Friday meetings. They will be at 1 p.m. I believe the agenda has been published for this Friday's meeting. If not, please expect to see that shortly. And those are all of the housekeeping items that I have. With that, I will turn it over to one of our colleagues, Senator Carrie Buck, who does not sit on our committee, which makes her a special guest in Nevada Senate Judiciary today. And I will open the hearing on SB 136.
Good afternoon, Chair Scheibel and committee members. I'm Carrie Buck, representing Senate District 5 in Clark County. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present Senate Bill 136 to you today. This bill represents an important and much needed improvement in assisting those who are reentering society to become productive citizens after being incarcerated. The bill streamlines the process to get either a valid Nevada identification card or renewal driver's license issued by the Department of Motor Vehicles prior to release. Joining me today to help present the bill and answer your questions are Nadia Krall, Judge of Department 4, Clark County, Edward Bevilacqua, Director of Education, Novum University, and Mike Hartman from the National Conference of State Legislatures, Criminal Justice Division. Having people get their legal ID issued while in prison provides the best assurance that the person applying for the ID is the actual person that needs the ID. For example, the Nevada Department of Corrections, the DOC, is holding the prisoner named A. Therefore, the goal of the bill is to provide the prisoner named A with a legal Nevada ID when he or she leaves prison. Just a bit of background information before I go into specific provisions of SB 136. I would like to provide a little background. In 2013, this legislature passed Senate Bill 423, which got the ball rolling by authorizing the Nevada Department of Corrections to create ID cards for offenders released prior to release from prison. Now, I'm not completely sure why a completely separate ID process was created when the green striped prison IDs are invariably useless for inmates to do even simple things like cash a check, rent a hotel, or get a job. And every session since 2013, this body has tried to fix this situation to no avail. Inmates continue to leave prison facilities across Nevada with a useless prison ID that has less validity than a Costco card or YMC membership. So my colleague, Senator Hansen, has worked on this very issue every single session since he's been here. When a person is released with little more than the clothes on his or her back and they get a green stripe prison ID, he or she is expected to get a job or stand in line 3 to 4 hours to turn in their voucher that is given to them to get a legal Nevada ID, or they have to wait for 3 to 4 months for an actual appointment. This bill attempts to fix this issue yet again, and I hope we can get this done this time. So as stated by the DMV, a global solution covering everyone being released from prison, including out-of-state residents and or non-citizens, those leaving Nevada upon release, and inmates in all jails across the state would be too overwhelming and out of reach for the DOC or the DMV. So therefore, after many meetings, the compromise and the way to ensure this bill is implemented correctly for a subset of this population, at the very least, will be what I call a crawl, walk, run approach. By this, I mean that the DMV can begin by furnishing IDs and or driver's license to those who are already registered in their system and whose identities can be easily verified. For example, initially the program would assist only those who currently have valid driver's license or ID, but it was lost. The DMV will in fact issue a duplicate ID or driver's license. The second one would be entered prison with a valid driver's license or ID that has expired while in prison, and this is a substantial amount. A renewal of someone where the chain of custody is intact, that is, there is no issue of identity theft. Or number 3, entered prison with a suspended or revoked driver's license, say a DUI, and who are now required to possess a Nevada ID, reclassification from driver's license to ID. So this group would not include then those who possess an out-of-state ID, who are not eligible for an ID, including non-citizens, and are currently in the system, but there is a question as to the identity, a good faith reason to question that they are who they are, or who in DOC has identified them. It is important to note that for most people, we can go to the DMV's portal and order a duplicate or renewal license without having to get a new picture taken. So after meeting a few times to discuss solutions, the DMV understands and is working on an approach with DOC and is creating processes and procedures to do those 3 subsets. They agree that a valid legal ID can be issued to many inmates prior to leaving prison, especially those with, again, a current valid but lost ID, a valid upon entering prison but now expired ID, and a driver's license that was suspended due to a crime but can be replaced with a legal Nevada ID. Under the conceptual amendment uploaded to Nellis, those inmates meeting those criteria are qualified because they are already in the DMV system. I believe this is a path forward towards success for about in between a third to a half of the inmates transitioning to parole, which is a start. So with these goals in mind, if you look now at SB 136, it creates a mechanism whereby the DMV works with NDOC, and it'll make it possible for the inmate to obtain those driver's license for those specific subgroups. Sets forth in section 3, it sets forth the requirements of an offender that must meet the information and an offender must provide to the DMV on an application for a photo ID that is to be created by the DMV. The next part provides that once an application is completed, that NDOC must immediately transmit it to the DMV for processing, and that the DMV must process the application, issue the ID card, and transmit it to NDOC to be given to the applicant. And then provides that any ID card issued under these provisions must indicate clearly that the DMV has verified the full legal name and age of the offender, as they are already in the DMV system. With the conceptual amendment of those specific categories, there should be no problem. In section 5, a conceptual amendment proposed by the DMV requires that the DOC will, not later than 6 months before an offender's projected release date, provide assistance relating to obtaining a valid ID or driver's license, including providing the offender with the application described in section 3. And requires that the DMV will, not later than 3 months before an offender's release, use the photo in their system or take a colored photo of the offender for use in a photo ID card, which will then be in their regular identification, Nevada identification. The remaining sections of the bill are technical in nature and make conforming changes to statutes, in addition to providing that the bill is effective upon passage and approval for administrative purposes and is agreed upon in the latest conceptual agreement, which is January 1st, will allow them to get this implemented between the two entities. And so the goal is just simple. It's qualified inmates leave prison with a valid Nevada ID. The fiscal impact. So regarding any of these fiscal impacts from the government agencies, currently, inmates get a voucher from the DOC for an ID renewal upon release. However, they are unable to use it most times because their ID was either lost, expired, or stolen while they were serving their term. A lot of times evictions happen and all of their stuff is gone when they come out. And so if you look at the fiscal ramifications with this, you figure employment's going to reduce recidivism. And recidivism costs perhaps $20,000 to $30,000 per inmate per year, and probably more if the reincarceration costs, including PMP costs, are included. So people who are not employed often turn to crime because it's the only way to acquire money. When people are working, PMP officers should be more effective. When people are legally working, employees and employers pay more taxes, Social Security, unemployment, insurance, etc. People who are legally employed also feel better about themselves and life in general. They need not operate in the shadows. So the fiscal impact, if you could, can be built around a financial model showing that each inmate who does not go back to prison for lack of an ID, a job, and successful re-engagement into society will save the state between $20,000 at minimum in incarceration costs. It only takes 1 or 2 people not going back to prison to get an ID for 100 people. It is possible that 20% will not commit, and we're hoping to track this data for the legislature. The benefits of providing inmates with a valid ID upon release far outweighs the burden of providing it. Our discussions with the DMV and NDOC are ongoing, and I hope we can get to a place where there is virtually no impact. I will, of course, inform the committee of any developments on this front prior to the work session on the bill, should one be held. So in conclusion, having a legal ID is an essential first step in providing second chances. Our current system is fraught with barriers that make it difficult to stay on the right path. We are setting people up to return to what they know and re-enter the system. This small investment of time and effort on our part will make a huge difference for those who deserve a second chance. Senate Bill 136 will empower this vulnerable population to make the right choices upon release and move forward towards success. It will ensure that inmates close to parole can get an official government issued ID so they can cash a check, get a job, and become contributing members of our society. The DOC already provides identification cards, and I passed those out to all the committee members. They were confidential, but I wanted you to see them because they make me sad that we can't give them an official ID. The DMV already works with former inmates to get them valid IDs and driver's license. Now let's take this to the next step by streamlining the process before they leave prison so that these citizens can have a brighter future the minute they walk out of the gate. I believe this will help them so that they don't have to go back into the gate. This is a worthy cause. These are people who deserve a second chance. This is the right thing to do. Please help us get a valid ID in the hands of the inmates prior to release from prison. And now I'll turn it over to Judge Kroll.
Thank you, Senator Buck. I really appreciate you asking me to speak, and I appreciate the courage that you have to bring this bill. Obviously, this relates to prisoners. And one of the things that this bill can establish is, one, reducing homelessness, which is a huge problem in the state of Nevada, especially Las Vegas and Clark County, where I'm from. You have people coming out of the prison system, and they don't have IDs and they can't get a job. One of the first things they do is become homeless after they do transitional housing if they're not working. The second thing that this bill will do will allow them to get jobs. And when you have a job, you're less likely to commit a crime. So one, you're going to reduce homelessness, and two, you're going to reduce crime. You are the legislators. You are the ones who create the law. I'm a judge. I am simply there to follow the law that you decide. And this bill, Senate Bill 136, can make our economy more vibrant and reduce homelessness and reduce crime. And that not only benefits the people who have been in the legal system, but it also benefits our community. And no one knows the identity of a person better than the prison system. So there can't be any fraud as to who is getting an ID because the prison system already knows who these people actually are. And this bill is very narrowly tailored to people who already have Nevada IDs or Nevada driver's licenses. So I appreciate your time. I know that you are extremely busy with other matters and other bills, but reducing homelessness and increasing employment and reducing people going back into the prison system are three huge benefits that this small bill can provide. Thank you.
And now you'll hear from Edward Bevilacqua, the Director of Education from Nova Mu.
Hello. Good afternoon, Chair Scheibel, committee members, and thank you, Senator Buck, for inviting me to have the opportunity to speak. My name is Edward Bevilacqua. I represent Nova Mu, which is a business that currently provides essential services to over 1,000 Nevada inmates and returning citizens. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to support Senate Bill 136. I too hope you agree that this bill represents a simple, important, and much needed improvement in assisting those released from prison. The bill simply streamlines and secures the process of obtaining a valid Nevada identification card. As Senator Buck said, there's a lot of talk about the importance of second chances in helping returning citizens get back into society. This bill is a simple yet essential step in turning the talk into reality. Here's the problem. Without valid ID, no working age adult can properly function in society. For virtually every ex-felon, this means no job, which means no money, no credit, no housing, no cell phone, no car, no ability to buy anything. It means no self-sufficiency. It means anger, frustration, and contempt. It means they're headed back to prison. The best way for returning citizens to hit the ground running is to provide a real Nevada ID when they leave prison. And it also, and importantly, means that that person is the actual person that needs the ID. That is, it eliminates the need for returning citizens to steal or borrow somebody else's identification. Having valid ID upon release creates a strong feeling of empowerment, success, and success is possible. I'd like to give a little background information on who we are. Since 2013, NovaMU has been helping inmates learn important skills so they can obtain stable, meaning, and livable wage employment in a field of their choosing, not unskilled labor jobs that don't last long. Since 2018, NovaMU has been providing basic needs, including housing, clothing, food, hygiene, cell phone, and transportation, plus counseling and education and employment services to reentering citizens. Our students are the ones who are usually unable to parole because they have no friends or family to parole to, no money, no resources, limited work history, and limited education. That means these are the people who need it the most, the ones the judge was talking about that end up in homelessness. Today, we have almost 50 such returning citizens living in apartments that we lease. All studies show that stable and meaningful employment is the best antidote to recidivism, and that the lack of marketable skills, not prison, is the major barrier to such employment. This means that helping people learn is essential. NovaMU's focus is on helping students learn those necessary skills. However, what's the point of having skills without having valid ID or having to spend weeks obtaining it? Senate Bill 136 removes this major barrier. Here's today's reality. I'd like to provide a snapshot of the typical first day for a typical returning citizen who paroles to our program. Late mornings, we get a call from Parole and Probation headquarters on Bonanza instructing us to come get them. They're easy to spot because they're wearing their prison uniforms. They carry a few possessions in cardboard boxes, if lucky, or otherwise in a laundry bag or clear garbage bag. We need to get them something to eat because they've been up since 4 o'clock in the morning, preparing for the bus trip down. Later, we present them with a high-quality T-Mobile cell phone with unlimited data and minutes because they blow up any other phone with all the apps and music and TikTok and things like that that they can. We then take them to get clothing. Around 5 p.m., we take them to a motel as a condition of their parole. Without our assistance, none could legally check in because they don't have ID. It's only because of us that those with the white ID with the green stripe can check in. Not everyone exits prison with this, even with this ID. Over the next 4 weeks, we prepare these students for their foundational first job, a job that fills the work history gap on their resume, acts as a practice job because they've been out of the workforce for so long, many for 20 plus years, and it also generates money for them. It is difficult to properly prepare ex-felons for stable and meaningful employment in only 4 weeks. However, it is unnecessarily complicated when we also need to have them obtain their Nevada ID once they're released. Obtaining ID post-release is usually very difficult because of the need to provide proof of identity and the delays caused by COVID. This difficulty manifests itself by planting the seeds of doubt. And when these seeds are planted, they quickly spread throughout the fertile soil intended for learning. Students become focused on the frustration of no ID rather than the benefits of learning. However, as frustrating as it is, our students who've been in prison more than once express gratitude in finally being able to obtain an ID and recount their story of woe resulting from their past lack of ID. Imagine the challenges for those who are not in a program that provides housing, clothing, food, hygiene, transportation, cell phone, meaning the people the judge was talking about. The prison environment is basically warehousing people, especially in the past year when virtually all programming, including our classrooms at Southern Desert and Florence McClure, were shut down. This does not provide ex-felons for today's world. Having a Nevada ID to those who are already in the DMV system is a simple yet huge step forward. So I'd like to conclude by saying having ID is an essential first step in providing a second chance to returning citizens. The technology is in place to deliver valid Nevada ID upon release. This bill just requires it. Not having ID sets people up to return to criminal behavior and return to prison. The small investment of time and effort by the DMV and NDOC will make a huge difference for those who deserve a second chance and for the rest of Nevadans. The DMV already enables people with access to the internet to obtain a duplicate renewal or ID online in minutes with no new picture being taken. Let's take the next step by doing the same for inmates before they leave prison. This is a worthy cause, the right thing to do. To do the things it takes to get ID in the hands of people prior to release from prison. Thank you.
And last, Chair Scheibel, Mike Hartman from the National Conference of State Legislatures. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Scheibel and committee members. I am Michael Hartman, representing the National Conference of State Legislatures. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak regarding SB 136 today. I was asked to give a brief overview of the legislative landscape across the nation regarding photo identification for reentry. Although legislators have taken many approaches to address the issue being dealt with today, I will try to focus my brief talk on the states which have as similar a situation as Nevada as possible, given the diversity of state statutes and regulations that currently exist. It is important to first point out that not all states have chosen to legislate this topic. However, that does not mean they do not provide identification cards through other agencies, such as Department of Motor Vehicles or Department of Corrections. For example, Colorado's Department of Correction reviews every individual upon intake and release to determine whether they will need assistance in receiving a Colorado state ID. With that said, approximately 13 states do have legislation aimed at helping previous offenders get identification either at release or immediately following. Of those, only West Virginia creates a program to stay unpaid court costs, which is a common barrier to identification cards. The state effectively allows individuals to apply for an identification card as though they do not owe any costs, so long as they continue to make their repayment plan payments. The remaining 12 statutes address the assistance, opportunity, or provision of either temporary or permanent identification cards. Utah, New York, and Arizona all provide for temporary identification cards, leaving 9 states which focus on permanent identification. Of those, Nebraska is the only state which simply provides the opportunity to apply for an identification card, as opposed to assistance with the application. Of the remaining 8 states, only Mississippi, North Carolina, and Wisconsin explicitly provide for driver's license. The remaining 5 states focus on valid state identification cards, sometimes referred to as civil identification cards or just state identification cards. Regarding the process of individuals receiving an identification card, many states choose to leave the timeframe open to discretion, providing statements such as provided to soon-to-be-released individuals or simply provided before release. Those that have time periods include Hawaii and North Carolina. In Hawaii, individuals who have less than 1 year remaining imprisoned are assisted, and in North Carolina, individuals within 6 months of release are assisted. Looking outside of statutes for a moment for timelines, states range widely. For example, South Dakota helps inmates within 120 days from their release. In contrast, Indiana refers individuals to their Mobile Bureau of Motor Vehicles unit 365 days prior to release. As far as identification card application fees go, states vary, paying the application fee for everyone, paying the fee for indigent individuals or those who cannot afford it, or merely helping with the application but not the application fee at all. I am sorry that time does not allow me to discuss the nuances amongst the states in more detail. However, I hope this gives you a brief overview of the nation. We at NCSL are available to provide more details on this topic moving forward, so please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Once more, I want to thank Chair Scheibel and the other committee members for granting me the opportunity to speak.
Senator Buck, does that conclude your presentation?
Yes, thank you, Chair Scheibel.
All right, then we will move on to questions. I see we already have a few, and I will start with Senator Hansen.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just wanted to get a statement on the record real quick. It's my 6th term on Judiciary, and 5 of those terms we've dealt with this exact issue. So we thought we had it fixed when I was chair in 2015, and here we are again. So I want to first of all congratulate Senator Buck for doing a first-class presentation. I don't think this is a partisan issue at all. We are now, instead of attempting to bite the whole apple, we're actually taking just kind of a tiny bite out of it, just to deal with ones where there's no major issues. It was surprising over the years to see some of the obstacles that the Department of Corrections ran into when they were attempting to get IDs. I mean, I don't know of anybody that's going to dispute the idea that we don't want to have prisoners returning to the state prison system. And the idea that something as simple as an ID could help reduce that recidivism rate is certainly something that everybody on this committee and in the legislature should gladly support. So I'm all for the bill. Senator Buck and I met with the Department of Motor Vehicles head, Julie Butler, a woman who I've worked with over the years several times, and she's an outstanding type of person, get it done kind of person. And she assured us that DMV is going to tackle this and actually has been working pretty aggressively on that. So anyway, I just wanted to do a little shout out, Chair Scheibel. Thank you. I know this is a bill that undoubtedly will be near and dear to your heart as well. All of us should share the same goal here. We want to get these people back reintegrated into society. And the idea that we have been unable to assist in the one little area of identification is just kind of shocking. So maybe this is the big time. Thank you, Chair Scheibel.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Pickard.
Thank you, Chair Scheibel. I had pretty much the same thing to say, so I won't repeat what Senator Hansen just said, but certainly since I've been in the legislature, we've had this bill, a prisoner ID bill, every session I've been here. So, but this question is really for Judge Kroll. I wonder, Judge, if because one of the things that we heard in 2019 as an obstacle to these IDs was that the Department of Corrections didn't know who the inmate was. There was some questions as to the identity of the inmate. In your experience, have you ever convicted or seen convicted someone who they didn't convict an identified person?
No, I have not. I've not seen that.
So
I've always seen them be able to confirm their identity.
Right,
so that's why I'm confident about the bill.
And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you there. It's fair to say that an identified person who has been identified in a court of law as to his actual identity was the one convicted, and there's no mistake about who that individual that's behind bars is, at least with respect to the state of Nevada. Is that accurate?
Interrupt just for a second and ask Judge Kroll to clarify how many criminal cases she's presided over.
I am a civil judge, but I have 20 years of experience of legal work as an attorney doing civil and criminal work. So I have done criminal cases and criminal trials in the state of Nevada, but verifying the identity once it's gone to trial and someone's been convicted, their identity has been verified first.
But how many criminal trials or cases have you handled as a judge?
Right now, I preside over all civil trials.
And before that, you didn't do criminal trials as a judge?
No, I'm an all civil judge, only as a lawyer.
Okay, then I'm going to ask that we move on from that question, Senator Pickard.
Sure, no problem, and I think that's good to get on the record. So, Judge, as a criminal attorney, I don't know if you were prosecution or defense, but you handled more than a few criminal cases, correct?
That's true. And also, even though I have an all civil docket, I do criminal record sealing regularly, and I've had countless criminal sealing cases. So I do preside over the sealing of criminal records. So I do have a lot of experience in that area of criminal law as a judge.
All right, and I appreciate that. So I just want to make sure that it's clear that at least as to the state of Nevada, there's no doubt as to who we're dealing with. These aren't unidentified people that they could be anyone, because I think that creates all sorts of constitutional problems if we've convicted someone without knowing who they are. And I don't do criminal law, and it was always my understanding that at the outset of the case, when they're one of the earliest questions that will be asked is, who is this individual sitting in the defendant's chair? And there's never any equivocation as to who we're convicting. I just want to make sure that that's an accurate statement.
And I'm going to need you to state your name for the record if you're going to answer this question.
Yes, I agree with you, Senator Pickard.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Bevilacqua, I wonder if you could speak a little bit of your interaction with the Department of Corrections as to obtaining identification, or I'm sorry, as to the individuals coming out. Are any coming out with government ID that they can use? Are we talking about every inmate that comes out? Are we talking about a select few? What are we dealing with here?
Thank you, Senator. This is Edward Bevilacqua. There are indeed a small minority of people released from prison on parole that do have valid ID, valid Nevada ID, not very many. Some have expired Nevada ID, and not very many. There's a number of people that have California ID that may or may not be expired, but that isn't, you're not allowed to work in Nevada with California ID. You have to be have Nevada ID. And I just want to clarify one small little nudge about ID. If somebody is arrested and they don't have ID and they don't have any fingerprints in the system, there is the possibility that they will be incarcerated under a fictitious name. But those people would not be able to get ID under this proposed bill because they wouldn't be able to prove that they're in the system. So a small number of people sneak by, they're arrested, they don't have ID, they don't have fingerprints on the system, and so they do go to prison under whatever name they say, but those people would not be getting ID under this bill. These would be the people that Senator Buck said would be excluded because they're not in the system.
All right, very good. And I don't know if we have anybody from DMV, but I'd be interested to see, after listening to Senator Hansen talk about his discussion, and maybe Senator Buck, you know the answer to this. If these are people that are going to already be getting ID at some point, are they suggesting this is somehow raising the cost to them? Or is this just a matter of timing as to when they would have to go about this? Do you know the answer?
Senator Carrie Buck, for the record, if I could defer this to Edward.
I'm getting some feedback from our staff that they're having a hard time hearing the presenters. So if you guys could just make sure that you speak clearly, you're close to your microphone, and state your name every time that you speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Pickard, Chair Scheibel. Carrie Buck, for the record, if I could have Edward speak to that.
Thank you. This is Edward Bevilacqua. Senator, would you mind restating the question, please?
Sure. I'm just, one of the things that came up in my conversations in the past was about the cost of providing these identification cards. And I'm wondering if you are already working on getting these ID cards. This isn't an additional effort for DMV, and I'll let them, if they're on the line, I didn't hear that they were present, but it doesn't look to me like this is an additional cost to DMV. It might just be a timing where we're moving it up in time for them, but this isn't it's something additional for them. Once the applications are made, they've got to do that. Is that correct?
Well, I think it's pretty self-evident that if people have to first, if the state has to spend the money to give them a worthless ID, the white ID with the green stripe, and then they have to go get a Nevada ID, this would be a cost savings measure because we eliminate the step of getting this ID that it doesn't really serve a legal purpose for being able to work. We save money by not having to get two IDs, the white stripe ID that doesn't have much value, and then inmates to actually get the Nevada ID, which they need in order to work and function in society. So I think this would be a cost savings.
Right, thank you. And thank you, Chair Scheibel.
Sure. Are there any other questions from members of the committee? I just have one question myself, which is that we've heard a couple times that DMV is basically cooperative in this process, and I think a couple of our members have asked questions that would be better suited for the DMV, and I'm wondering if you can speak to why they're not here today.
Senator Buck, for the record, I believe they are on here, but I didn't have them as a witness. They did submit a conceptual amendment for which we took part of.
Okay, so hopefully we'll hear from them in testimony, whether they're in support or neutral or somewhere else on this bill. Then my follow-up question is, it sounds like you're suggesting that DMV is already working on this process. So what in this bill removes a barrier that existed to DMV? Why can't DMV work with NDOC and get inmates IDs without your bill?
Chair Scheibel, Senator Buck, for the record. Well, we've been waiting since 2013, and I just am trying to have faith that this will happen without this bill. But unfortunately, there's been kind of workarounds. So I'm hoping that we can put this into a policy that is stated and very clear so that it can get done.
Okay. And I think Vice Chair Canizaro had a question as well. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Scheibel. I appreciate the indulgence. And I think it's fantastic to hear so much support for making sure that offenders who leave prison can have the appropriate resources and the appropriate connections to community to not only obtain employment, but to also function in society, because we do know that most of the people who are in our prison system do eventually come out. So I appreciate that, and I'm so glad to see this. And I think it falls in line with a number of things, like allowing for prior offenders to have the right to vote when they leave prison, because that allows them to participate in the community. So I'm glad to see that we see some additional support for those types of measures, for allowing them to have prison reentry programs instituted, for allowing us to deal with things like the bill that we heard from Senator Neal, and I forget the bill number off the top of my head, that would allow for us to actually give them not only some employment opportunities, but also to pay them. So I'm hopeful we can have a lot of support for that as well, because I think these all kind of fall in that same measure. Now, we just heard testimony that this bill is actually a cost savings to the state. So Senator, I'm wondering how you figure that this is a cost savings to the state, and have you done the math on that or had confirmation from NDOC or from the DMV that this would actually be a cost savings? Because as we kind of see it is a cost to the state to actually provide those IDs. And so the testimony was that there was a cost savings. So can you clarify that, please?
Thank you, Senator Majority Leader Canizaro and Chair Scheibel. So this bill makes clear the law that requires the DOC and DMV to get the identification to prisoners, which has been avoided in the past since 2013. As far as cost savings, if you look at the entire picture of inmates having recommitting and going back into the system, yes. Also, they get a voucher and get to a free ID voucher but they have to go back to the DMV after they're released, so that they do get a voucher currently. It's just this would make them be able to use the voucher before they're released.
So I guess this brings up a different question, because that doesn't exactly indicate a cost savings, which was the testimony that we just heard. This is just a different process by which they obtain the same ID. You mentioned a voucher program, and we obviously don't have the Department of Corrections or DMV here to talk about what those programs look like. But your understanding is that if you are eligible to receive, and I know NRS Chapter 209-511 allows for the director to develop certain parameters for getting offenders hooked up with resources to obtain driver's licenses and IDs. They get this voucher, I would assume, allows for them to go to the DMV and obtain either a driver's license or an ID.
Majority Leader Canizero, Chair Scheibel. So I didn't testify that there would be a cost savings with the Nevada DMV, but with the Nevada Department of Corrections, because they wouldn't be giving out the prison IDs. Instead, they would be helping the inmates get their official IDs by the time they get out. So there will more than likely be some cost to that, and they are getting that together. I will have to inform the committee. I've just met with the DMV on Thursday, and so we'd had 3 other meetings before this to try and come to a consensus on who they could help with this bill. And so once we have those numbers, currently there are about 500 people per month coming out, and of that subset, the ones that would qualify under this bill would be about 150 on average.
Right. So the testimony about cost savings came from one of your presenters, that this bill is actually a cost savings to the state. So I think when we get that testimony, we want to make sure that we know what exactly and how it is you achieve the cost savings. But my last question was with respect to the voucher that you just mentioned. That voucher is given to individuals who ask for assistance in obtaining another copy or an ID where they're able to go to the DMV and get that. Is that how I understand this voucher program that you just mentioned?
Edward, I will refer to you. This is Carrie Buck for the record, sorry.
Yes, thank you. This is Edward Bevilacqua, thank you. So I think there's 3 things. The cost savings that I mentioned was, instead of having to print 2 IDs, process and print and tabulate and record and store the cost for 2 IDs, there would only be 1 ID, which was the ID they needed. As to
I'm sorry, I'm just going to interrupt and stop right there because I want to make sure that we're very clear about this. Individuals who ask for a DMV ID because they qualify for an identification card or a driver's license that would be issued through the DMV, they receive a voucher for that. Is that how I understand when you say 2 IDs, you're talking about the voucher?
No, I'm talking about the white ID with the green stripe.
Okay.
That's
aside
one
from
ID.
The white ID, right? Aside from the white ID with the green stripe, the other ID that you are referring to is that voucher in order to obtain the state-issued DMV ID.
Yes, the other ID I'm referring to is the Nevada, just a regular Nevada ID, which eventually all people need to get. So that's the fixed cost the state is always going to have to do. The extra cost is to produce an ID, the white ID that has a green stripe that doesn't have much value. But that's not the real cost savings. The real cost savings is not having people go back to prison. That's the $20,000 set cost that the state ends up having to pay because somebody couldn't get a job and they ended up homeless, et cetera. I think that's the real cost savings, not the $10 or $15 or whatever it is to produce the white card for 150 people per month.
Okay. You just need some clarity. Yeah, I just need some clarity on that because when we have testimony about this being a cost savings, when we have a bill that has quite a, this is not the finance committee, so I don't want to kind of go too far down that road. I just
Majority Leader Canizero,
I wasn't done talking. I just wanted some clarity on that. I think the next part of the question, Mr. Bevilacqua, that Senator Buck asked for you to kind of address. My understanding is that individuals who would be eligible for an identification card or for a driver's license card are given a voucher in order to go to the DMV to obtain that. Is that correct?
Yes, that voucher, though, is to provide a duplicate for people who have a valid ID or driver's license. That's not a renewal. That's not a reclassification.
Right. So it sounds like that this conceptual amendment that we're seeing with parts of that, well, in that with the conceptual amendment, we are only permitting identification cards to individuals that otherwise are eligible with the DMV.
Yes, people that are already in the system. So, and I think to Chair Scheibel's question, why is this bill needed? I think the fundamental thing is this bill is needed to correct the problems that Senator Hansen and Pickard mentioned with the past ones. The past bills were not able to provide ID for people coming out of prison because it was a global approach, an attempt to solve the problem for everybody, whereas this bill is a very limited approach that only attempts to solve the problem for people who are already in the system. And that's why it's needed, is to correct a bill that does not work, or not a bill, a statute that does not work.
Right, so this would not apply, and I think this gets to the other piece of what we've been discussing here, is that there are individuals who are in prison but don't have things like a formal birth certificate that has been notarized and another form of ID, or evidence of where they actually reside, or the types of documents that are now required for even to get an identification card, since we're looking at real ID standards, that individuals who are in prison, while we know who they are, sometimes do not possess these official documents and can't get copies of those in order to obtain identification.
Edward Bevilacqua, for the record. Yes, that is correct. This is just limited. This was, as Senator Buck said, this is a crawl, walk, run approach. Let's just get the low-hanging fruit so those people can work. And they are identified while they're in prison. So this would be the simple process that you or I could go online right now if we had a computer and renew our license without having to take a picture. So this is just trying to conform what it is for people outside of prison to make it easy for people inside of prison to walk out of prison with an ID, a valid Nevada ID, so they are eligible to start working immediately.
Right, and I appreciate that. I think we needed some clarification because there was a conversation about whether folks are identified or not, and I don't think that is not the issue. The issue is whether or not you possess the requisite official documents to meet the standards with the DMV for things like a real ID in order to obtain that state-issued driver's license, identification card, etc. So I appreciate you clarifying that. The other piece that I had a question on, and I think Chair Scheibel was trying to answer this, and I don't know that we got a very clear answer. There have been references to a program or programs that NDOC and the DMV have been trying to set up in order to get folks driver's licenses and identification cards. So what is that program? Who is it targeting? How does that program work that they are currently putting together?
Majority Leader Canizero, Chair Scheibel. We do have Sean Siever on the phone. If I could defer to him, he is from the DMV and can answer your question.
Yes, and I'm not sure if that was clear about the phone versus the Zoom. We did go ahead and reach out to Mr. Siever during this presentation to see if he wanted to join us, and he has graciously agreed to hop into our presentation to answer some of these questions. So actually, I'd like you to go ahead and address Vice Chair Canizaro's question first, and then we can go backwards. I have a few for you as well.
Hello, Chair. This is Sean Sever. I have our Deputy Director here, Jude Heron, that can help answer some of the questions.
Perfect, as long as he will state and spell his name for the record, please.
You bet. Thank you, Chair. Jude Heron, Deputy Director, Nevada Department of Motor Vehicles. If I may try to do this in one fell swoop, kind of answer all these questions. Appreciate Senator Buck and Senator Hansen reaching out to us. We had a great conversation last week. One of the things that we expressed with them back in February 2020, we met with Nevada Department of Corrections and other representatives from the city and county jail systems to tackle this issue that has been long-standing. From that, we created a subcommittee that was actually geared to the same outcome as Senator Buck's great bill that she has submitted. In actuality, the first phase that we were working on internally prior to COVID hitting was actually dealing with the same process of dealing with the Nevada Department of Corrections inmate release unit and working with them to create a system behind the scenes so that we can issue duplicates, expired credentials or identification cards for those that were suspended or revoked. These were standard driver's license cards. They are not real ID credentials. At this point in time, we wanted to get them an actual Nevada credential rather than a Nevada Department of Corrections identification card. Meeting with Senator Buck and Senator Hansen, we provided some history of that. Our goal right now in working with both senators and we'll be reaching out to Department of Corrections to reinstate our subcommittee to continue to begin this process behind the scenes. One of the things that I want to express is, express to the senators as well, is because of the timing of the department's transformation bill that we have in as a budget bill right now, we are looking at this behind the scenes process of creating these credentials for Nevada residents that are inmates being released. We want to make sure that we're not allocating a whole bunch of IT resources into this. We want to create a system that is in part electronic, in part manual. And the reason why I say that is because we are going to be dividing and conquering a lot of our allocated resources to this transformation project that will take place over the next 4 years to transform our system in its entirety. So, but we are very confident with this amendment that we, in fact, will be reaching out to Department of Corrections this week to start revisiting these, this process that we started. And in fact, in March of 2020 is when we sent our internal proposal back to Nevada Department of Corrections based on duplicates and expired licenses and so forth. So, and then COVID hit, and I don't need to tell you any more about that. Everybody was dealing with that. So we're back on track. This bill has helped us to get back on track as well. And we're all on the same page of creating a credential, an actual DMV credential for those inmates that are already in our system as a Nevada resident. We will have to work through on the regulatory process with the Nevada Department of Corrections to deal with a lot of logistics, going back and forth, validating who they have in their systems, making sure that when the card is created that it is actually sent back to a key person in Nevada Department of Corrections to provide to the inmate before they're released and so forth. There is some programming involved. We do have, we haven't had a chance to recalculate that. Our original fiscal note was based on the language, present language, but I believe our fiscal impact would be smaller than what we've provided in the original language. So I hope that helps.
That does, and I'd just like to clarify, we only have one amendment. I only received one amendment. It was proposed by Senator Buck. It's dated tomorrow, but I'm sure she meant today. And is that the amendment that you're referring to?
Chair, for the record, Jude here, Deputy Director, yes, you are correct. We've worked with Senator Buck and provided that part of the language.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And are there any more questions from members of the committee?
Thank you, Chair Scheibel.
Do you still have one, Senator Cannizzaro? Okay, looks like just Senator Settlemyer then. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate it. One of the things that I see that's beneficial with this bill is that in the previous renditions and the stuff that we have on statute at this point in time, we were trying to provide information that was impossible to find, as the majority leader indicated in the past. It was very problematic. I mean, if someone didn't come from the state of Nevada, if they came from different states and somehow were within our system, trying to find their birth certificates, social security numbers, and things of that nature was, well, basically impossible. So I appreciate the bill narrowing it down so we can actually quit doing stuff that we, well, literally couldn't do. With that, I just want to get clarified on the record, you know, because I'm very grateful to have the DMV on the line to do that. That again, this is just basically going to help out also, because now it'll go after the ID cards, which are easier for us, and not a real ID card, because again, the concept of a real ID card is a whole nother set of hoops that have to be jumped through and becomes much more expensive to try to do. But this seems like a very reasonable concept of an ID card that allows them to, without having as much stigmatism versus the previous cards. And I just wanted to get that on the record from the DMV if possible, Chair.
Chair Scheibel, this is Jude Heron, Deputy Director of DMV. Thank you, Senator Settlemyer.
If you just speak up a little bit or maybe get closer to the microphone. I'm apparently, sorry. Yeah, we're still having a little bit of trouble hearing you.
Yeah, my apologies. Chair Scheibel, thank you. This is Jude Heron, Deputy Director of DMV. Thank you, Senator Settlemyer, for the question. Yes, to answer your question, it is just for our standard driver's license or ID cards, depending on their status, and it is not for a real ID at this time. Our belief is to get them this credential so that when they're released and eventually can obtain employment and so forth, if there's any issues with their credential, let's say they're suspended or revoked, they received an ID card, they can actually still obtain, you know, employment, bank accounts, and so forth. Go forward with that, and then at some point in time deal with reinstating their driver's license. In regards to the real ID, you are correct. There are other federal requirements that are involved, but in that process, in that same time frame, that person can work with in getting various documents to obtain that real ID in the future. Our goal is just to get them a credential before they're released so that they can start the process out right. The other side to this is that with this interim approach that we're working with Senator Buck on, it also allows us to set us up for a future transformation to where we can actually really deal with some of the other complexities in the inmate system, where you may have a non-resident, someone from another state or maybe even another country, and we can possibly deal with those with better technology and with some federal laws that have been passed already to help with the driver's license programs throughout the nation.
Thank you for that, Madam Chair. If I could follow up. Also, I think I hope within the amendment is a concept, maybe we delay a little bit of the implementation date. As we've all discussed, it'd be a little bit simpler for you to do with a new system, because we all know that Cobalt needs to be gone and that we need to get you guys updated. So I just wanted to make sure that was in the amendment. I haven't had a chance to read it as of yet, but I was wondering if you guys had.
Yes, Senator, through the chair, this is Jude Heron, Deputy Director, DMV. Yes, Senator Buck did take that in consideration, and we greatly appreciate that. That helps us to work through the regulatory process, work with NDOC, and build a good system that is kind of a mixture of electronics and manual approaches, so it sets us up so we don't have to throw away a lot of code and put it into a new system. So when we transform into our new system, so I think our hybrid approach in the interim will help us and everybody achieve the same goal.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Jude. Thank you, Sean. Also, you know, it was interesting. I was just there the other day at 8:30 in the morning, and interesting, there wasn't even a line. They finally, you know, you guys are doing a remarkable job trying to deal with the backlog, and thanks for doing that. And Thank you very much, and thank you, Chair, for the questions.
Thank you, Senator.
All right, if there are no other questions, and I'm not seeing anybody piping up with any questions, then we will move on to testimony. I will kick it over to our fantastic staff at Broadcast to take testimony in support of SB 136.
Thank you, Chair Scheibel. To testify in support on Senate Bill 136, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Once again, to testify in support on Senate Bill 136, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 725. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes to speak, and you may begin.
Thank you, Chair Scheibel and committee members. This is Nick Shepak, Nickshepak, with the ACLU of Nevada. We are in support of Senator Buck's bill with a conceptual amendment. Anyone who is known to the DMV should leave prison with a state-issued ID. That should be the law. That should not be a debate. Our only concern with the bill as originally written was that it seemed to create a gap for incarcerated people whose identity could not be verified. The absurdity of the fact that we have people incarcerated in the state but don't know exactly who they are is a discussion for another time. The fact is those people exist. There are people in NDOC who we cannot identify, and the current prison ID program, as designed and brought before this body by former Director Zarenda, helps to ensure that those whose identity cannot be verified to the level required by the DMV leave with an ID that they can use to at least get a hotel room or prescription medication. We can't afford to lose that safeguard. I deeply wish Senator Pickard's hope that we knew everyone in our prison system was correct. However, we do have incarcerated people whose identity the state is unable to verify. They were arrested without certain information and are unable to get an ID from the DMV. We strongly agree with Senator Buck that those who can get a DMV issued state ID or driver's license should have one upon release. Navigating the DMV can be challenging for the best of us, and with COVID backlogs, it's an extremely daunting task. By ensuring more people are released from prison with proper ID, we will ensure higher success rates for the formerly incarcerated and lower recidivism rates throughout the state. This will save us money. This is a logical bill with the potential to help many people and keep our community safe. We urge you to support SB 136, and we thank you for your time.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last 3 digits, 318. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair Scheibel and members of the Senate Judiciary. This is Kendra Birchie, KendraBertschy, with the Washoe County Public Defender's Office. On behalf of the Washoe County Public Defender's Office and for John Pirro with the Clark County Public Defender's Office, we urge your support of this bill and appreciate Senator Buck for sponsoring this legislation. We agree with the statements made by the ACLU regarding our initial concern of a potential loophole, but believe that the conceptual amendment will resolve that issue. Housing and employment are 2 important components of a successful reentry. There are 2 things that are virtually impossible to obtain without an identification. We believe that this bill will help those who have served their time to actually receive a chance when they are released by having an ID, which can mean stable housing, a better job, better place to live, access to social services, medication, educational opportunities, the ability to open up a bank account, and so much more. One piece of plastic really provides the additional services necessary to ensure that someone is successful after they've completed a term of incarceration. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, caller. And as a reminder, we are currently on support testimony for Senate Bill 136. If you'd like to provide support testimony at this time, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. And with that, Chair Scheibel, there are no more callers to give support testimony at this time.
All right, thank you. Then we will move on to testimony in opposition of SB 136.
Thank you, Chair. To testify in opposition on Senate Bill 136, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Once again, to give opposition testimony on Senate Bill 136, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. And Chair, there are no current callers to give opposition testimony at this time.
All right then, we will move to testimony in neutral. Mr. Sievert, did you want to give some general testimony in the neutral position?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Sean Sever from the DMV. And we originally we were on the phone actually to testify neutral, and we couldn't unmute ourselves, so I apologize for that. But thank you for letting us zoom in on it. We are neutral on this bill. We had some concerns on the original bill, and we are grateful the bill sponsor worked with us on submitting an amendment to it. We totally agree a solution is needed, but we want to work through the solution through the regulatory process, which the amendment indicates. So thank you. I also wanted to note that we did submit a fiscal note on the original bill, but we can take another look at that with the amendment and adjust that accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we will go back to broadcast. Mr. Kyle, is there anybody on the phone to give neutral testimony?
Thank you, Chair Scheibel. To testify in the neutral standing on Senate Bill 136, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Once again, to give neutral testimony on SB 136, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 101. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good afternoon, members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. My name is Victoria Gonzalez, VICTORIAGONZALEZ, and I'm the Executive Director of the Nevada Department of Sentencing Policy, and our agency is in the neutral position of this bill. Our department assists the Nevada Sentencing Commission. One way we assist the Commission is in its oversight of justice reinvestment in Nevada. Our agency does this by collecting data and assessing savings and costs from all areas of the criminal justice system, including those related to reentry and recidivism. There's discussion today about identifying such costs and savings related to recidivism and reentry, and our department will do what we can to assist in this. We look forward to working with DMV and NDOC in collecting data and tracking any savings and costs related to reentry and recidivism resulting from its enactment. We believe this data will assist the Sentencing Commission, the legislature, and the public in assessing the outcomes of this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last 3 digits, 404. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair Scheibel, members of the committee, Senator Buck. This is Dave Callen, C-A-L-L-E-N. I supervise statewide reentry for the Nevada State Parole and Probation. While the division is neutral on the overall provisions of the bill, we do agree with Senator Buck's position that allowing eligible inmates the opportunity to obtain a valid ID prior to release would be greatly beneficial to our parolees and to our mission at PNP. And with that, I'll offer to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, caller. And with that, Chair Scheibel, there are no more callers to give neutral testimony at this time.
Thank you so much. And it looks like Ms. Dixon Coleman has raised her hand in the Zoom. I understand that she is a representative from the Nevada Department of Corrections, and I would like to give you the opportunity to testify in neutral if that's why you're raising your hand.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair Scheibel, for letting us testify in neutral. This is Elizabeth Dixon Coleman, for the record, for Nevada Department of Corrections. We are working very diligently, as already been stated, with parole and probation, as well as Nevada Department of Motor Vehicles, and we'll be happy to cooperate in any way that we need to on any of the bills, as previously stated, as well as SB 136, as we are working with today.
Thank you so much. I believe that concludes our testimony for today, which concludes our hearing on SB 136. I will now close the hearing on SB 136. That takes us to the last item on our agenda, public comment. We will go to the phone lines to see if there's anybody who would like to make a 2-minute public comment at maximum.
Thank you, Chair Scheibel. To provide public comment this afternoon, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Once again, if you'd like to provide public comment this afternoon, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. And Chair, the phone lines are open and working. However, there are no callers to give public comment at this time.
All right, thank you so much for your help. In that case, that concludes our meeting for today, March 22nd. We will be back tomorrow at the same time, 1 p.m. We are now adjourned.